the same way. I know you will still love me the same. 'Cause honey, your soul could never grow old, it's evergreen. And baby, your smile's forever in my mind and memory. I'm thinking about how people fall in love in mysterious ways. Maybe it's all part of a plan. Well, I'll just keep on making the same mistakes, hoping that you'll understand. But baby, now take me into your loving arms. Kiss me under the light of 1,000 stars. Place your head on my beating heart. Thinking out loud, maybe we found love right where we are. Maybe we found love right where we are. Maybe we found love right where we are.
Good afternoon, grasshoppers. It is time for at least a brief stream today, as I was inspired by the games of Chigorin recently. Chigorin, like you or I, was a struggling artist in chess. He was not always the best at his game, although he was the father of Russian chess and certainly the best of his day at that time. He was a master of tactics. He was commonly known for his artistry with knights, Chigorin knights. He tended to favor the knights over the bishops, so this is always proven to be the case in at least one previous game. So in this particular game, Tarrasch, the leading exponent at the time of the German school, actually he was being overtaken and had been overtaken by Emanuel Lasker, the second world champion of the time. The second world champion was going to assert himself in 1894. This game takes place in 1893, and we see the most common opening of the era. Now there are many ways for Black to respond with this. Black could play the Steinitz defense, and certainly it was the trend of the day to hold the center. And they believed in holding the center and keeping a good grip on those four center squares, and in this particular manner, with this pawn chain, the Steinitz defense does fill that bill. In a modern attempt to create counterplay on the queen side is very realistic and offers, I shouldn't say very realistic, very dynamic, and offers a lot of counterplay with the threat of playing b5 at any time, for the most part. But in those days, they had not yet discovered the power of Morphy's concept behind a6, and the Berlin was all the rage as it is today. The Berlin attempts a direct counterattack on the e4 pawn, the preparation of d5 in the center, and at the same time seeks to just stabilize the control of the center while attacking and defending at the same time. Castling d6, we've reverted into a Berlin Steinitz defense. Remember, the year is 1893, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with this except for the unfortunate nature of the passivity of the defense. Now, getting back to Chigorin's knights, Chigorin actually liked to hold the center and had this creative concept of holding the center and then placing a bishop on the long diagonal to apply more pressure to white's center. Certainly today, white may or may not have already grabbed the space and cramped black's position. But white continues with their maneuver, heading toward the queen side with the knight. I'm sorry, heading toward the king side with the knight, and therefore seeking to harass black on either of these two squares. Today, it wouldn't be unlikely that we would play a move like g6 and put our bishop on g7 in a very King's Indian-esque defensive formation where we might be able to counterattack with a later f5. However, Chigorin seeks to embarrass White's bishop by retreating his knight. Now, this was a relative novelty at the time. This knight on now on b8 had traveled to f6, to d7, and to b8, and should the bishop recapture, the knight will find itself on c6. A very interesting and creative concept indeed. The move knight to b8 also sought to bring out the bishop to g4. So white restricts this with h3, and black now, in the continuation of the embarrassment of the bishop, kicks the bishop, and the bishop now runs to the key diagonal, which of course puts pressure on both f7 and is an indirect attack on black's king. Now, there's no way to get at black's king at the moment, so therefore Tarrasch, as ambitious as he is, also seeks just to control the center and to prevent any pawn breaks by black, although black's not in any position to seek a pawn break. Pegasus, good morning, how are you? Ron is in the house. Welcome, Ron. Mad Physicist the other day just recently donated 5 gifted subs, and I've sort of shifted gears, although I owe Pegasus a couple of hours on Purdy, and I believe a couple of hours on Tiger Hill Art Person, and maybe a couple more of my memorable games, and I hope to continue those as soon as I get an opportunity to. Ron, you're the best. And of course, Ron has gifted so many subs that now I need to do many dedicated study streams. I've decided to change it in a way. I'm just going to dedicate a study stream to each of those players. I think I owe Ron countless numbers of dedicated study streams. He has donated 30 to 40 or possibly 50 gifted subs in the last several weeks, if not only a couple weeks. But needless to say, Dark Blade, good morning. Oh no, I'm sorry to hear that, but university is important. We're discussing Chigorin in this particular position as he is holding the center. And holding the center was the trend of the day. Today we tend to give up the center, attack the center, and plan to overwhelm the center in the form of what my first coach called the snowball or momentum initiative push, where in Sicilian defenses the pieces are organized behind pawns, and only at certain moments will the pawn break and the push forward commence. And the overwhelming nature of that initiative of the forward movement of black's forces, this is done by black, overwhelms the white center. Now, if you can imagine that white's pieces occupying the center are not unlike that reporter covering the hurricane on the sandy shore of Florida, for example. God help and God willing that everyone there is safe. But as the reporter is standing there trying to give his report and the update on the wind conditions and whatnot, holding his ground as white might hold the center, the kinetic force and the dynamic energy of the hurricane winds will often be pushing the gentleman a couple of steps over as he continues to try to remain stationary and maintain his composure. That's not unlike how the white center is often displayed or demonstrated as it holds itself up in this particular position while black tends to push forward in a dynamic movement toward the opponent. And here, white seeks once again to establish his center, and black continues his maneuvering for a possible pawn break. Knight to e7. We can see how creative this is. Queen to d2. Knight to g6. Now notice that the knight on b8 has now migrated to the king side. The knight on d7 had migrated as far as toward b8. And this lends itself to the impression that Chigorin certainly did try to get the most out of his knights, trying to always find the best possible squares for them. White seeks to control the center with rook on a to d1, and now black plays a very strange move to get out of the way of those two major pieces bearing down on the d file. For just a moment here, I would like see if our timer can come up. And now that the timer is up, let's place it carefully on the board here. I guess it's right next to. At the moment, it is right next to the. I'm going to place it up here, where we can actually see it. It may obscure some of the chat. But for just a brief moment, we should try to find what is White's best possible move in this particular. Yeah, exactly. They've really groomed those mustaches in lieu of Gillette not yet being in existence, right? So we are looking for candidate moves for White. Whoops. Make it candidate moves for White. And Tarrasch himself in this particular position mentions that he is in time trouble. Now, it wasn't uncommon to have, as a time control, 16 moves in an hour. From what I understand, it was roughly 16 moves in an hour, and it graduated to 40 moves in 2.5 hours. Or was it 45 moves in 2.5 hours? So White has a distinct advantage, and I had never really previously thought of Chigorin as a defensive player. But he certainly was a strategic and maneuvering player, not unlike the modern standards of Petrosian or the bobbing and weaving of the young Magnus Carlsen, as he sought to outplay his opponents in longer games. We now have a better understanding of how to press with an advantage, and in those days they did not necessarily have all of our knowledge and experience and the cultural understanding and study of their predecessors that we have today. So in this particular position, there are 2 or 3 moves which will consistently continue upon White's advantage. And Pegasus has already found rook on f to e1. Knight f5 does call out to be played, but we have to remember that when you are cramped and when you have less space, you will tend not to want any exchanges as White. So you're going to hope to press for more. So rook on f to e1 may well be the best move. But as Tarrasch mentioned in his time trouble, he tended to move his king when he needed to make a time control. And he chose the ill-fated king h2, which kind of puts his king a little bit on this dangerous diagonal. King h1 certainly, as Pegasus pointed out, would have been better, if you must have a king move, that is. And Tarrasch responds in kind, also preserving his space advantage and getting out of the way of the indirect attack or the assault by that bishop on c4. So the bishop tends to get out of the way. Now there were other moves such as queen to c2, besides rook on f to e1, that could have continued in this game, could have continued the play in this game, just building up in the center. And Chigorin comes up with yet another creative concept, bishop to e7. And the bishop is prodding the knight and targeting the queen. Now, it is obvious and clear that Tarrasch is lacking a plan for how to continue in this position. Now, the year is 1893, and we don't blame him, of course. But nice work to Pegasus, our MVP in the chat. The stream is dedicated to him as much as anyone. We'll give him another throw out there. As the pawns are pushed forward on the queen side, pushing the bishop back to what perhaps Tarrasch thought was a favorable position. There's no guarantee that this pawn is going to be able to move, but it might support a knight moving to f5 in the future. Knight to f6, knight e1, the knight to f6. Interestingly enough, this knight has made a complete journey. It came from g8 to f6 to d7 to b8, back to d7, back to f6, and who knows, perhaps the knight will, as it turns out, find itself on the g8 square again, having made the journey back and forth. Now, you might think that time is a factor in chess, but apparently not for these gentlemen. Now, black is still clearly worse, and he is seeking a way to coordinate his pieces. And as white is dominating the space, white needs to come up with a plan, and he finds an ill-fated one indeed. Now, instead of the move knight to g8, there is a nice modern concept here, which I don't think would have occurred to the players of those days. But in this particular position, we're going to be looking for candidate moves for black. Instead of playing knight to g8, which was perhaps a little bit over the top, white's advantage is at its most minimal in this position. Candidates for black. And we'll start that timer for just a couple moments. This is a good time for you to pause the video if you need more time, if you're watching this on demand later on. Not necessarily the best time to do it now, but as it turns out, in this particular position, Chigorin had an opportunity, a modern opportunity, which in many variations, let's say I can think of it most recently being a novelty in the Briar defense. Three moves for black. Three concepts for black. The idea of looking for several moves in every position is to find a range of candidate choices from which each of those might be drawn branches of analysis that could lead to an assessment that will be either favorable or unfavorable. And it took Stockfish a little while to find this particular idea, and it's well known today. Knight takes e4 with the idea of f5 and f4 is a very cool concept, Pegasus. Absolutely. Very cleverly done. His next idea, rook to g8, is very Kramnik-like against Aronian. Kramnik came up with the concept of rook g8 to migrate the knight out of the way and play g5, g4. And knight g8, of course, is what he played, but the move that really takes liberties is it's very difficult to see, is the blast with d5. And with the blast of d5, should black give up the center in any way, we can grab even more space before recapturing. Remember, there is still a discovery on the e4 square with bishop to d6 check. So we have to consider the ramifications of what's going on here. So, for example, if white were to take what he thinks is a free pawn, we would be able to scarf the bishop pair, and we still have Ron's idea of f5 and f4 for a very clear, decisive, perhaps even decisive advantage, because we're getting back we're counterattacking the space with a major advantage and an attack on the king. So what else could black do? What else could white do in this position? White could try to hold the center, and now we can refocus on the white's king along that diagonal. And this position is relatively, if not equal, very close to equal, with white having only a minimal advantage as far as having slightly better piece coordination. Unfortunately, in our position, Tarrasch, with his coy knight to e1 maneuver, sought to be outdone, and Chigorin felt it up to his standards to play for the move f5, I guess. Maybe knight h4, maybe bishop h4. It's very unusual, right? And white should continue along the same lines of putting pressure on the center with knight to d3. Instead, Tarrasch actually tries to break open the center, having the less safe king with the move f4. Black's king is far safer, and of course this is requiring a little bit of an exchange. And it's really not in white's interest to seek exchanges when he is attacking. But he now has an open file on f7. He now has the ability to push his pawn on e4 to e5. And let's see how much patience and discipline Tarrasch in his younger days here. Well, I'm not sure how young he was. I did not, and I failed to look up. No, knight takes e4, bishop takes e4. Rook a8. Oops. Wait just one moment. Oh, but that's with, in the previous position, yeah, knight takes e4 was not really thought to be such a good idea, so only after d takes e5, we do have to watch out for our rook on a8. Therefore, bishop to d6 seems very realistic. I'm just going to look at that one more time. From this perspective, certainly we have to watch out, and we are capturing on d6 with check in many of these variations, so it looks pretty good. You're right, though, there is a very serious problem with the rook on a8. Going back in time, the move d5, though, is I'm not sure if it was played by Spassky in the Briar in the mid to late 80s. I'm going to have to look that one up. I certainly learned about it first in Chess Informant. Chess Informant was the source of almost all of my new concepts, and it is certainly still the Bible for improvement and the study of great games of contemporary grandmasters. And in this particular position, Chigorin seeks to outmaneuver his opponent's knight on e1, and we see these exchanges, and black has now obtained the bishop pair. And ideally, we could even capitalize on the pawn on b5 by continuing to push forward with further space advances, spatial gains, advances on the queen side. Or we can play, as Chigorin did, very creatively with the move knight h6. Not exactly my first choice. And in this particular position, once again, white has an opportunity to open up lines for his bishop, but instead chose to improve his worst placed piece. Now, 3 questions when you're trying to form a plan, which are absolutely essential, which must be written and noted down. Always pay attention to where are the weaknesses. Where are the weaknesses, and which are the worst or best placed pieces? Perhaps we could improve our worst placed piece from the rook on a8, or we could improve our bishop to b7, but we also have to keep an eye on the f5 square. So is e6 really the shot? very difficult for black to find a very good foothold for a plan here. White relocates his knight toward the king side. Certainly nothing should be wrong with this. Black holds the center. Remember the theme of holding the center. And in this position for white, you might try to find a candidate move for white. To continue the position, Tarrasch does not find the right concept and in fact imperils his position somewhat because of his haste. At 16 moves per hour, it could well be that he was once again in time trouble for finding a plan. We're looking for moves for white, by the way. Looking for moves for our opponent. While we're sitting at the board, I'm not going to reverse this position. White is coming in our direction. It does take practice, and it is very important to be able to see the perspective of the opponent's ideas while sitting across the board from them. I'm not a huge exponent of walking around the table and looking at it from the opponent's perspective, although that may indeed help the youngest of students. Once again, we're looking for several moves that you might score yourself accordingly. Basically, if you're able to at least write down the concept that is best or consider the concept that is best, you might consider yourself, at least knocking on the door of equality to the great player that you're studying. And certainly if you choose as your first move the move that the world champion or great player that you're studying also chose, or that the engine approved move was. Remember, you have to do all this work on your own first, and then only then score yourself on how well you were able to find the concepts and hopefully choose the concepts. With the help of analysis, you can confirm your suspicions. In this particular position, it would have been best to continue preparing the advance of the center with rook on d to e1, perhaps even stepping out of danger with the king. But instead, Tarrasch chose the immediate e5. Now, black is not going to lose his head in this particular instance. He is going to continue to improve his position, and he chooses to do so by bringing his bishop from c8 to e6. And in this manner, he might be able to cover the king side against any particular threats, especially those involving queen takes h7 mate. And after e takes f6, bishop takes f6, white does indeed go for it, and Tarrasch follows through on his plan. Now, exchanges for the player with less space, that is black in this case, are going to ease our position and centralize our rooks. After all, queen takes queen would only be met by rook takes e8, and then every black piece would be very close to getting back into the game. I don't know about this knight just yet, but white avoids the exchange. And black should perhaps just tuck his bishop away and prepare the anchoring of his knight on f5. Instead, he still mucks about with queen to d7. Now, white has lost most of their advantage as the rooks are about to be connected. On a Wednesday night, well, I didn't stream this morning because I had a late night at billiards, and I was very thankful to the teams that played late in order to get ahead in the schedule. We only have a couple of weeks before playoffs, so there's no real room for rescheduling matches, but holiday parties at Society Billiards and Bar are causing a little bit of the shifting of the schedule. And next week, I would have had to have booted one of the matches out. So here I am, Quadraspassky. How are you? I, unfortunately, was the beneficiary of a forfeit win. The opponents did not show up. There are some health concerns going around, and as much respect as I have for them, I'm happy that they chose the safer cause for all of us. I don't necessarily know that it was COVID related. I'm in the don't ask, don't tell policy. Knight f5 was suggested before by they can't handle COVID. I'm not entirely sure it's a matter of handling COVID, Quadraspassky. In any event, in this particular position, white finally does indeed reach the open file for his rook on d1. This was clear that he needed to have this in before. And black, of course, could easily do the same thing, but now he's falling back to the plan of reorganization that we'd mentioned before, with g6, bishop to g7, and b3 to attempt to limit white's advances on the queen side, as well as possibly preparing c4 with a gain of space in the center. Black, once again, finding his worst placed piece, chooses to relocate his knight a little bit toward the center. Now, it does look like black's conglomeration is a bit hokey. Once again, white threatens or prepares against black's possible g5. I don't know that black was really preparing g5, g4, but this is certainly not a threat yet when the bishop is defending. And the rook, black's worst placed piece, now arrives on the scene. So it appears that now it's a battle for piece coordination. Piece coordination. And white centralizes the knight without taking care of his king. Right? Now, probably better would have been the immediate and direct assault on the g6 square, trying for further mating attacks after queen takes g6, queen to h5 check would be somewhat difficult to meet, but it would be possible. Instead, white chose the move knight e4, and black decided to relocate his pieces toward the f5 square with knight h6. White prepares to double rooks. Knight f5 is advertised. Rook on f to e1 as planned. And now black comes up with a rather devious possibility with queen to d8, limiting the movement of the knights at least to a certain extent, possibly preparing knight to h4. And at the same time, possibilities of playing c6 and d5 without losing any tempo on a knight to c5 are in the works. And white should follow through on their idea, by the way. White should continue with knight on e to g5. And as black is obtaining the bishop pair and has certain attacking chances, they don't necessarily want to trade off all of the attackers just yet. Now, Tarrasch backs up on his idea with knight to g3, allowing the exchange of one rook. White recaptured with the queen. And black seeks to preserve his bishop pair, which are raking across the board at two significant weaknesses in the white camp on c3 and a2. Black to move in this particular position. Candidates for black. I am hoping to add this before the U.S. Championship starts in 17 minutes. We're looking for 3 moves for black. Try to think in terms of threes. Do not attempt to look for the best move or concentrate so overtly on seeking the holy grail of the best move. Your mission at first when approaching a position is to survey, find the candidates for the best possible moves, and among them will be good moves, hopefully better moves, and possibly even the best move. And then you can always differentiate between them through analysis. I am asking a lot. So for the most part, in this particular position as black, we might be considering queen moves, bishop moves, pawn moves. Not entirely positive about a rook move. But we do wish to preserve the bishop pair, and the queen is keeping the knight off of the g5 square at the moment, and the king is quite a bit in the lurch on g3. Yeah, queen d7 is not quite. If you must move the queen, there are a couple of better squares for it. Ooh. Pegasus has the move that was indeed played by Tarrasch. And of course, trying to undermine the center with b4 can be done in more than one way. Tarrasch misses the best move to preserve his advantage in accordance with the old world seeking peace play, and plays queen to f6. Certainly the best move would have been c5. As Pegasus noted with b4, he wanted to start breaking down that pawn chain. c5 was ideal. And of course it fits in with the line of complementing those raking bishops across toward the queen side. But as it turns out, since queen f6 is his choice, he has a very cool concept in mind. White, if he knows what's good for him, should run. Or at least try to cover, which is almost what he does in the game. He can cover the f4 square with the threat, with further threats to h7 and g6, but they're not real with bishop on g8. You might have thought that this was the Karpovian concept of putting the bishop on g8, but even Karpov got it from some of the greatest players. And at long last, black finds the move c5 to break down the pawn structure. D takes c5, of course, was the worst possible move that white could play. He should seek to coordinate his pieces, hold the center, and not allow his king to be a target along that diagonal. So that after the move d takes c5, d takes c5, c4, all seems pretty good, right? However, after queen to d6 check, the king is forced in the path of the rook, and after bishop b takes c4, b takes c4, bishop to d4 check takes advantage of the pin. And now the king is somewhat stuck in the center. King to f1 could easily be met by queen h2, or even queen g3, threatening mate. White's best move here is not a pretty one. White has the option to try to buy off black with the exchange sacrifice, but instead chooses to run with his king, allowing the further capture of a free material with bishop takes c4 check. Now black is up one distinct pawn, and this could lead to an endgame victory. So after the move bishop to d3, suggestions for black. Good day, Lauren. How are you? Candidate moves for black in this position. Let's have at it. Let us have at it. The Tarrasch stream. Unfortunately, Tarrasch is a little bit on the wrong end of this one. As Chigorin, we got to see quite a bit of the 1893 Tarrasch struggling to find a plan to capitalize on the space advantage. I am using the stamp for Chigorin because I think that is the best illustration of Chigorin that I could find. It made him look rather handsome and dashing. Not unlike myself, now that I think about it. Yeah, we have a similar nose. Very similar nose. Maybe I have more of a similar nose to Tarrasch, but that remains to be seen. Suggestions for black. Bishop. I like Lauren's idea. I am concerned about losing the bishop on c4. Yeah. And at the same time, yeah. You formatted nicely, though, exactly. Well, there is something here that I really wish to emphasize, and that is we want to avoid trades when we are attacking, especially when we have the safer king. We might wish to avoid those trades, and we also wish to preserve the bishop pair. Now, we want to preserve the bishop pair. Remember, if you're the attacking player, you don't necessarily wish to exchange pieces while the opponent has a vulnerable king. Tarrasch chose instead to take advantage of the open e-file by hassling the queen directly. There is but one or two real squares for the queen in this position. Queen to g4 and queen to h4. Queen to h4 may be microscopically better. However, in this particular position, once again, we can try to find good moves for black. And one of them is not the move that Tarrasch expected, probably. Since I already just mentioned we don't wish to trade pieces as an attacker, the better move would have been bishop to c3. And after bishop to c3, should the rook move, then we have queen e7 check, followed by queen to e3, and it will make life very, very difficult for our opponent under these circumstances. We have rook takes, bishop takes. It's very difficult for the queen to bother the queen. Bishop takes, rook takes, yuck, right? Almost with certain death. Instead, in this particular position, going back, check was delivered with an exchange of pieces. Now this also turns out to be the good because he saw a very direct attack. His idea was that he could attack on h2, but even here he might have had better opportunities to go for more with the move rook to e8 check. And after king to e1, we can actually simplify because we're going to be causing a lot of problems for our opponent with a discovery on the bishop, forcing the king to e2, queen to h2 check. And should the king even remotely think about coming up or winning the queen or checkmating with the move, bishop to d4 check. The queen to h2 check was played instead of rook to e8 check. Remember, we always have to balance and coordinate all of our pieces. And queen takes a2 is a little bit of a lemon. A little bit of a lemon, I say, because black is still winning this game with the stronger bishop on the dark square diagonal. In any event, the move that he might have wished to have played with the same further consequences that we saw before would be bishop c3. And after rook e2, queen h1 check picks up the f3 pawn, or at the very worst, shifts the queen to the other side of the board to cause even further problems if our bishop needs the help. So queen takes a2 was completely unnecessary, but I can understand the idea that this rook pawn is going toward victory, that we do have to watch out for our own stuff in this relatively new age environment where everything is flying for the most part. So here, queen takes a2, rook to e7, already some counterplay has been developing. So bishop to g7 is preventing the move. Rook takes h7, queen takes g6, followed by queen to h7 mate, which would be highly embarrassing. So bishop to g7, queen to e4 is still threatening. Bishop is is hindered. And after the move queen to b3, king e2, queen to b2, check, king f1, black does not find the best move returning to the scene of the crime. The Russians haven't offered you anything. He also said that was a fair trade. Yeah, this was a match, by the way. I believe this was the second game of the match. I should have put that in the stream title. They might offer you a nice piece of land in the Ukraine. It's ultimately probably going to prove worthless, as it turns out. In any event, as it turns out, Tarrasch should have gone, I'm sorry, Chigorin should have gone across to that side of the board. I didn't reset my timer the previous time. I spotted these weaknesses and, of course, preparing some form of counterplay as well. Against f3, h3, etc. But we are about to see another move shortly after the move c6, bishop to take c4, queen to c1, check, king to g2, queen to d2, check, king to g3. Suggestions for black? As we have only 4 minutes, we are only 4 minutes away from the U.S. Championship. Round 1, 2022. Hans Niemann playing at young Christopher Yu. There's one move in this position which is clearly better than the rest, which will force some extreme concessions on black's part. Where are the weaknesses? What are the best, which are the best or worst placed pieces? And throughout every game, we also have to pay attention to what our opponent's ideas are. I did wish to do one more quiz, and as we are short on time, I'm going to expound upon the fact that the f2 square is extremely and surprisingly weak. This is very close to threatening mate. Just a matter of a few short moves. Black is able to find the best move, seeking in this particular position. We're going to give it 1 minute here to find candidate moves for black. Bishop d4, indeed. Pegasus was on it. Nicely done, sir. Candidate moves for black. One wrong misstep, and we could be in trouble. There are only two, I repeat, two legal moves in this particular position. And I believe that Quadra-Spassky has found it with queen h6. We cannot allow any perpetual check after king to h6. We will have a very difficult time escaping from these checks. So the move queen h6, blocking the check, giving back the material and an effort to defend is key. Queen to g5 check, very important. King to d2, and one more time, candidate moves for black. Absolutely right, Pegasus. We had to cross and cover with our queen. Black to move in this position. Again, one of the worst place pieces. Does the opponent have an idea? Where are the weaknesses? Pardon me, yawn. Rook to d8, indeed, Pegasus. Rook to d8, indeed. Coordinating our pieces toward the first rank. Here, a lot of good moves. Well, the pieces move exactly the same as they did before. And in this particular position, one check, and there are no more checks. The move queen to e3 would be met by the devastating removing of the defender / x-ray defended rook on d2 by the queen, and it would be very hard to avoid trouble here. As it turns out, he ends up playing queen to h4 check. Rook to d8, queen a7 check, king a6, queen takes a6, queen h4 check, and after bishop to e2, we have one more move that may end our game. Candidate moves for black. That's not against Pegasus. Candidate moves for black. As we seal the deal in this particular position with a forced mating sequence. That in itself was ironic and necessary. Queen e1 indeed. Queen e1 takes advantage of the pin by attacking the pin piece again. And while keeping the king in the box, we're actually threatening a very quick checkmate. And the game did end here, as it turns out. Now, I want to thank everybody for being a part of this short broadcast. It is important, though, that we give the U.S. Championship its due. And should we, if we have a suggestion to raid, and Freya chess. She's good at chess. She is good at chess. Freya chess? What do you think? We're looking for a smaller streamer as well, but Freya chess isn't actually doing chess. She claims that she's doing chess. She has her chess.com banner on, but it's not actually chess. But Freya chess is setting up an arena, which all of you might enjoy. So I'm going to send you over there very quickly. Thank you to everyone. Namaste. Ron for being here on this brief subscribers only podcast. I do have the window open as it's lovely outside. Let's roll our credits. Thank everyone for having been here. Thank you all. Thank you, Quadraspassky. Ron, I'm going to give you one more shout out. Thanks, all. Talk to you soon, and ciao.